No, I did not. I'm not a big State of the Union type of person.
I think it wasn't even. I agree. I don't really see the point of the State of the Union anymore.
Yeah.
But I still love watching it, and it
Mhm.
was actually a very. It was a great speech. Didn't agree
I
with
heard it was a good
100% of
speech.
it, but it was a good speech, and I think it kind of shows. It kind of confirms for me there's a method to his madness that he
Yeah.
he knows what he's doing. You could not. Someone who the left says he's just nuts and off the rocker, but I really think if you're if you're really off your rocker, you cannot deliver that and keep yourself that composed for 30 for an hour and a half. Anyways, we're here with PragerU Live. I'm Jared Sechel. I'm here joined today with Professor George Yancey. He's a Christian, a sociology professor at the University of North Texas, and he's the author of Compromising Scholarship: Religious and Political Bias in American Higher Education. And Professor Yancey, you wrote this great article in the stream, and it's what made us really want to interview you. We read this. I think you wrote it in mid-January, just before the inauguration, and the title of the piece in the stream, which is linked in our description so everyone can go read it, is 20 Dogmas That Keep College Students from Learning How to Think. So my first question for you, Professor Yancey, and thank you so much for joining us today from Texas, is with your views, how do you still have a job as a sociology professor at a university?
Well, that's kind of funny. Uh, I must say that my department and my school to this point has been very good as far as letting me do what I do, as long as I get my job done. I publish academic articles. I teach my classes. I do my service. I have to do my job, just like anyone has to do their job, and so I've made myself very valuable in that sense. But I know that I'm fortunate that I'm in a very good space right now.
Good. I'm glad to hear that that a conservative professor can do their job at a university. It's
Yeah, I
encouraging.
like to describe myself as non-leftist because I'm not technically
Non-leftist.
conservative. Yeah.
Okay, non-leftist. Good enough. So I want to read a few excerpts from your piece in the stream, and for everyone watching, we have the link in the description. So go click on it if you want to follow along. So there's 20 dogmas that keep college students from learning how to think. So here's a couple excerpts, and then I'll get into my next question. So you write, I'm sure you've seen the news reports showing students now protesting against Trump, even though they have no chance of overturning the election. Worse than that, there's evidence of protesters mistreating students who voted for Trump. What motivates students to act in such an uncivil manner? Part of the answer is that their professors have encouraged them in it. In fact, the whole academic environment has generally encouraged them. They're not just protesting, they're promoting dogma they've been fed. There is a set of beliefs in academia that I call education dogma, and I fear that colleges and universities are so busy pushing those beliefs, they've lost the ability to teach students how to think critically for themselves. In the process, they've given students implicit license to punish those who fail to accept the approved dogma. So my first question for you, Professor Yancey, is what's your definition of a dogma in the context of dogmas that are conventional wisdom on American campuses?
Well, in my article, I quote Webster's definition of dogma: a belief or set of beliefs that are accepted by the members of the group without being questioned or doubted. And I like that definition because dogma are those beliefs, and we all have them to a certain extent, are those beliefs that we don't question. Now, it's okay to not, like, for example, I'm a fan of the San Antonio Spurs, and I don't question how good the Spurs are. But of course, at the end of the year, if they don't win the championship, then I'm forced to confront the fact that they're not the best team at that point.
There's some cognitive
So
dissonance.
yeah, yeah, I engage in in a disconnect, and that's okay. So we all have the beliefs that we have that are not questioned. The problem on college campuses is that a lot of these political and social beliefs are exactly the type of beliefs that we should be questioning, that we should be debating. And when we say, here's the answer, and we're going to work to find this answer and no other answer is acceptable, that's dogmatic. And that's a whole lot worse than being dogmatic about the Spurs, because that's about issues that I point out in my article that are about how we live our lives, about how we treat others, and unfortunately, the way we treat others who don't fit into, who are heretics, if you will. We can see some of the results of that in our society.
Can you read through Do you have if you have the article in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Can you read through your list of dogmas?
Sure, be happy to. There is a campus rape culture that encourages the sexual assault of women. A woman accusing a man of rape has vastly more credibility than the man who claims his innocence. The earth is getting dramatically warmer due to human activity, and altering that activity can stop or slow this trend. Israeli settlers and the Israeli government are as bad or worse than Palestinian terrorists. Fundamentalist Christians are morally the same as Muslim terrorists. Any military action in the Middle East creates more problems than it solves. Criticizing Islam as a religion of terrorism is an example of Islamophobia. Religious freedom is less important than the acceptance of sexual minorities. Society would generally be better off if traditional religion disappeared. Marriage between those of the same sex should be seen as the same as marriage between those of different sexes. Trans women, men who identify as women, should be allowed to use the same facilities as biological women. The physical difference between men and women play no role in economic disparities between them. A woman has a right to an abortion for whatever reason she chooses. Black men are targeted by the police. Anti-Hispanic racism is an important part of what motivates those who oppose immigration reform. President Obama has been criticized more than previous presidents because of his race. And I wrote the original article when Obama was president.
Right, a few days before the inauguration. Is that right?
Right. Well, actually, this actually came from a blog I wrote about a year before.
Okay.
So all of this was that's why I was trying to explain that one. Mm-hmm. Raising taxes on the wealthy will improve our economy. Political conservatives are generally greedy manipulators exploiting the marginalized or sincere dupes voting against their own economic interests. There is little, if any, correlation between hard work and economic success. The United States is more damaging to the world than other Western industrialized nations. Now, I want to be clear that I'm not saying that it's wrong to have these beliefs or to assert that this is what you believe. And in fact, I'm not even saying that I disagree with all of these. I won't go into which ones I agree or disagree with. I'm just saying that when we assert these dogmatically, as if this is the only answer, and we have to punish those who don't accept this answer on college campuses, which should be places of free inquiry, something is wrong. And that's why I wrote the original blog, and that's why I decided to bring it to the stream. And in light of Trump, who, by the way, I did not support in the presidential election. I was adamantly against Trump in the presidential election. But now it's on college campuses where you must be against Trump dogmatically. And even though I'm not a supporter of Trump, that troubles me as an academic who wants to see free inquiry.
How did this happen that the campus was just supposed to be the bastion of critical thinking and inquiry has become a place that seems to be defined by its dogmas, as you write here?
I think for me personally, this may just be a principle of human nature that if we're not careful, we tend to become tribalistic and we tend to punish those that are not us. And even though in theory the campus was supposed to be this place where we're going to accept all ideas and weigh them and the best ones will rise to the top, those factors have come into play so that once certain people got power, and I'm not blaming them as far as saying, that they're unique in this. I think you can find examples in all groups where this occurs. Once certain people got power, they started to use that power not necessarily to promote the best ideas, but to punish ideas that did not fit into their paradigm. And so I think that there's just been a process in which why this has happened. And it happens in such a way where it deceives some people who don't realize how dogmatic they come across or how dogmatic they've become. They just think this is the natural way, and there's no way anyone can think differently unless they are evil or misguided or foolish, that there couldn't be competing ideas that are worth considering. And so I don't think everyone there is like, I want to punish other ideas, but if you're in an environment where that becomes normative, you just tend to do it without even thinking about it.
You write two of the dogmas. Fundamentalist Christians are morally the same as Muslim terrorists. Another one, criticizing Islam is an example of Islamophobia. So you talk about the idea of Islamophobia. Is there such a thing as Christophobia, an irrational fear of Christians or Christianity?
It's funny because I actually have written on that topic on Christianophobia. I've actually written a book, So Many Christians, So Few Lions, which is an academic book, but it's based on written interviews, and so I quote a lot of people. So yes, and in fact, what I would argue is that the level of Christianophobia is the same as the level of Islamophobia, and I document this academically in the United States. But those with Christianophobia tend to be more powerful. They tend to have more education, more money, more what have you. So I'm not dismissing Islamophobia. There's too many cases where there have been Muslims who have been beaten up, who have been punished. I think there was a recent case, if I remember correctly, I may be off, of a Muslim who was beaten up. So I'm not dismissing that, but I'm saying Christianophobia is a very real problem that's not paid attention to in academia.
Yeah, and I think that the use of the word phobia is problematic in this case, but I would argue to the extent that there is criticism of Islam, as long as it's actually based on real terrorist acts by Islamists, to label that, for the left to label that phobia is disingenuous, whereas when they say that Christian fundamentalists are as bad as Muslim fundamentalists, it tends to not be based in fact, because you really don't see Christian fundamentalists committing terrorist attacks around the world.
I would basically agree with you as far as I don't think, I think it's okay to criticize Islam because it's okay to criticize Christianity. It's okay to criticize other faiths. It's okay to say, hey, there's a problem in this group. I think that's okay without it being a phobia. I agree with you. I think that Christianophobia sometimes leads to irrational criticisms of Christianity, but then you just deal with that. I will say that I use Christianophobia simply because it seems to be the word, and I struggle with this because I hear what you're saying. Phobia is not always accurate, but Islamophobia, homophobia. I mean, it was already out there, and I think it helps to make sense. Hey, this is a problem too, and while it's not exactly the same as these other phobias, it is very problematic. And so, I went around whether or not I wanted to say, are these people anti-Christian or should should we call these, what should we call this phenomenon? And I settled on Christianophobia. It may not be the absolute best word, but it's the best word I could think of at the time.
Do some of these dogmas ever clash with each other?
That's an interesting question. They don't tend to, because there's a strong correlation between beliefs of certain political ideas. Beliefs that Palestinian rights strongly correlated with being pro-choice, strongly correlated with supporting same-sex marriage, so forth and so on. The one area which I think is kind of interesting to watch is the whole transgender debate. Because while, for the most part, people who seem to criticize transgender seem to come from the right, I think if you pay close attention to some of the feminist community, there is a conflict there, because transgenderism kind of says that the essence of sex is biological. And that kind of goes against some of the feminist philosophies, which says that, gender is created by culture. It's created by culture to oppress women. So, it's not out there. It's not making big news right now, but I've read a couple of articles where there is a tension. For example, if you want to go to a women's college and you're a trans man, there are some feminists that are, one of the reasons why we want to have a women's college is we want to get away from men, and, is this really? So it can happen. It usually doesn't happen, but that's the one area where I think that there is some tension. Usually the people who share these dogmas share almost all of them. And they may have certain ones that they really are passionate about, but they also agree with the rest of them.
You're at the University of North Texas, which is in Denton, which I think is a pretty conservative area, probably. Seeing where it is on the map, it's not urban. It's outside Dallas. I'd assume it's conservative. Is that accurate first? And do you also experience these dogmas even in a campus in a conservative part of the country?
Yeah, I would say, Denton is a college town, and so I think that it's probably a little bit less conservative because it is a college town. But, we are in Texas, and Texas has been called the buckle of the Bible Belt, and it is a deep red state. We are in the context of a state government that is very Republican, very conservative, and that affects all of us. I think that probably helps to mitigate some of the dogma that you might experience at a place like University of Texas. Because the way it works in Texas is all the state governments have to go to the state government in order to get the funding. So if you're going to get too wild, the state government may want to cut your funding, and so I think that limits some of the dogma. I think what you'll probably find out is that in conversations, there's just this dogmatic assumption of what is right without thinking about what, alternate ways of considering ideas. I think there's probably less institutional pressure for these reasons, for the reasons I've given at some place like the University of North Texas. But when it comes to ideas, I think that you'll find that among the academics. And also you have to remember that, and this is less true for the students, what they experience, but for us academics, the dogma still is relevant to when we try to publish. And just to give you a little bit of a story, a lot of my early work was on issues of race and ethnicity. And when I tried to publish in those areas, sometimes I could, sometimes I couldn't. But my ideas really fit in with the paradigm of the day. Now that I'm working on issues of anti-Christian bias and academic bias and these sort of things, I still can publish, but it's much harder because I recognize I'm running up against a dogma that is represented in some of the ideas that I've already mentioned. So there's that issue. Even if you live in a conservative area, there's that issue that if you want to be an academic, your community is not just your college, it's your discipline. And in order to gain acceptance, in order to get your ideas out there, you sometimes have to overcome the dogma that is out there in your discipline.
You mentioned something that made me think of this. You said something along the lines of there's just an assumption that you sort of on a college campus that you believe like everyone else does. And I've experienced that. You experience this living in any progressive area of the country in Los Angeles. There's an assumption that someone who barely knows me will just assume that I hold similar political or ideological beliefs. My neighbor one night, I was waiting on the sidewalk for an Uber, and he asked me what I was doing. I said, I'm waiting for an Uber. And he said, oh, you shouldn't take Uber. Apparently the CEO is on some council with President Trump. And I didn't engage in the conversation, but to assume that someone thinks the way you do, it does seem to be a trait that exists in solidly progressive areas like the college campus or like most urban centers.
I think you're right. And to be fair, because I'm a Christian, sometimes you go to church, there's an assumption that everyone has the same ideas as well. And so
in any environment that might be the case, in any environment that's kind of closed like that.
In an environment where people assume or where there's a high percentage of people from a certain group, you develop an assumption that everyone thinks the way that you do, and that becomes problematic. And when I've talked to other non-leftist academics, this is part of what frustrates some of us, is that, people pop off and they just assume that we believe certain ideas and they don't even question those ideas. And we're expected to go along with it. Being a Christian, I can be with a group of individuals who kind of know me and maybe they don't know my work deeply enough. And they'll make some sort of derogatory comments about Christians. They'll call, those bunch of Bible thumpers or something like that. And they just assume that I agree with them. And so, that is a little bit frustrating. It's a little bit frustrating that that people don't actually investigate what my ideas are, but they just assume that I agree with them. And if they find out that I'm different, then they probably assume that there's something wrong with me rather than trying to figure out, well, why does he believe the way he does? And is there merit to it? Maybe even rethink their ideas. Let me just say this before we go on to your next question. I think one of the costs of dogma, I actually think it's much more costly to progressive students than to conservative students. Because when I went into graduate school, I probably was more conservative politically than I am today. In fact, I know I was. and I had my ideas challenged. And some of my ideas I changed, and some of them I didn't, because I actually had the challenge. I didn't capitulate over to the new ideas, but I actually dealt with. I fear progressive students go into college and their ideas are never challenged, at least not in class. And there may be a few conservative organizations out there that they can ignore. And to me, that is very dangerous, because that's my problem with non-critical thinking. Is you go into class, you go to school, you're not taught how to critically think. You're taught how to think more sharply along your ideas, but not really to think about other ideas, to consider them. And then I think you get this dogmatic thinking where those who disagree with you are evil, not just wrong.
We actually have a video on that very topic with a Penn State professor, Matthew Wessner. It's called "How the Liberal University Hurts the Liberal Student." The idea of it, the exact idea of it, is that conservative students go to colleges, they have their ideas challenged. It actually sharpens their thinking skills and their debating skills, and it might even change their mind. Whereas progressive students go to college and it's an echo chamber. They could go through 4 years and not have their ideas challenged. And let's say even if they still believe those ideas, you think, well, at least the university will help them have a better backing for those ideas. They'll be able to make a better case for those ideas. But if you go through 4 years of an echo chamber, that's usually not going to be the case.
No. I totally agree. I teach a sociology religion class, and I tell the student at the beginning of the class, if you care deeply about your religion, or you care deeply about being an atheist or something like that, I'm going to piss you off at some point during the class, because we're going to look at all ideas and we're going to look at them from different angles. And in fact, I'm going to make myself mad too, because I'm a Christian, and some things I look at, I ain't going to like myself. But I think that's the way it should be. If you go through 4 years of school and you never get mad at a professor for challenging your ideas, then I think you should ask for your money back.
Yeah, absolutely. They won't give it back, but you should.
They won't.
At least ask. And to finish up another point, and then we'll move on to the final question. And you mentioned, I said if you're in a university or in an urban liberal setting, it's just assumed that you have those views. People will speak to you as if you think the same as them. And your point is great. Well, that could also be the case if you're in a church or in sort of a more natural conservative setting. I'd say that the big difference is if you choose to go to church, you've really sort of you've totally chosen that environment. It's a pretty small, contained environment. Whereas if you're living in Manhattan, you could argue, well, you chose to live in Manhattan, but it's that sort of dogmatism multiplied by a million. Because there's so many more people there. So it's just that for conservatives, I feel like non-leftists or conservatives really have to choose a very specific kind of small contained environment to find so many like-minded people, whereas you can replicate that on the other side in basically any city or almost any campus.
Yeah, probably where I might disagree with you is, you live in a small town, you might get that on the conservative side where everyone. But I hear what you're saying, and I would even and to strengthen your point, I would argue that a lot of the cultural institutions, be it academia or the media or Hollywood or the arts, that they are also an echo chamber. And my work has been in academia, although I am starting to look at the media a little bit, and where this echo chamber tends to create these dogmatic ideas that are not challenged as well. So I hear what you're saying, that, and I think I might be inclined to agree with you that the progressives have the more powerful echo chambers, even though you can find conservative echo chambers as well.
Yes, no, I agree. And exactly, if you're in parts of the country, in rural America and small towns, you can find the conservative echo chamber, but it's on a small scale. And even then, if you turn on the TV, you're out of your echo chamber, because overwhelmingly the media tends to be, the movies, the TV, the culture do tend to be on the left. So here's how you finish your story. The dogmatists had better wake up for their own good. They may think they have a lock on their positions of academic power, but education dogma is keeping our institutions of higher learning from achieving their purpose, and the longer it continues, the more likely it becomes that people will wonder why they should support those institutions at all. So my final question for you, Professor Yancey, would be, what should conservatives or really any non-leftists do? Is the university salvageable as an institution, or is it a lost cause from an intellectual perspective?
Very, very good question. My last part was really towards progressive dogmatics, saying, look, you got to work with these people. And I actually see some evidence that that there's less support, less funding going towards colleges. And I think because it's this sort of dogmatic. Where was it? University of Missouri, where a lot of the alumni are cutting off funding because of what happened with the professor, the journalist professor, who asked for what was it? She asked for not bullies. I forgot.
Muscle. She needed muscle. The journalism professor needed muscle to shut up the journalist covering the protest. So
that's why I'm saying, look, you really need to have, for your own sake. And there's a bill. At some state, I forget which state, and I disagree with the bill, but saying, there has to be political balance. But the reason why that bill is out there is because we in academia have not addressed this issue. And so now people are trying to address it for us, and we don't like the way they're trying to address it. So that's the deal. Now, to your question, and like I said, I'm a non-leftist. Even though I'm conservative on certain issues, I don't claim to be a political conservative, but I am a Christian, and I fit that identity in that sense. And what do I tell other Christians? And what do I tell conservatives? I think it's very important not to leave the university if you're a Christian, if you're a conservative. And what I think we have to do, and this is borne out by research, when there's more contact with people that you disagree with, it humanizes those people. And so one of the things that I've been talking to other Christians about is, look, and from my point of view, if God calls you into academia, go. I mean, don't be discouraged by the problems. Now go find, there's things you should do to protect yourself, to find mentorship, to do these sort of things. But yes, by all means, go and go into academia. And I think that, one of the things I'm trying to do is establish a Christian studies program on a secular campus, because I think we have to have a presence in academia. And so I do think that we can't, if you're bad in academia, then there's no hope. There's no hope of turning around the dogma. But if we can be a presence, if we can do high quality work, and we will, like, for example, I'm studying Christianophobia. That's not normally going to be studied in academia unless it's a Christian, because Christianophobia is a problem in academia. And
thank God you're doing that. Thank God you're in academia.
I want more of me in academia who are Christians, who do quality work, who are going to study things that are not normally going to be studied, and make points that are not normally going to be made. So I think that's very important. We got to get involved with the game and not just take our toys and go home and abandon academia to those who are dogmatic. I think that's the best way we can turn things around, but it's a way that's going to take some time to turn things around. But the option of not going to academia and just trying to defund it, that just creates this war that I think is not going to be healthy.
I would, for anyone watching who's in academia, especially if you're an educator, PragerU has an educators program. It's really a network of conservative, Christian, religious, Jewish, non-leftist educators around the country. And I think that could be a great way to find a mentor, because I imagine it can feel isolating as a Christian or a conservative professor in the United States right now, but the field does need you to be in it. Even if it's a small percentage, it can be a bigger percentage, and it needs more people like you, Professor Yancey. So, Professor, thank you so much for joining us. For everyone watching, we encourage you to go click on Professor Yancey's article in the stream, which is in the description above this video, and tune in next time to PragerU Live. Thank you, Professor Yancey.
Thank you for having me.